So in this chapter, we discuss punk music and sort of the origins of punk music. And I think this was kind of, you could see this as the beginning of something that continued on, well, to this day, but certainly through the 90s. Green Day considers itself a punk band. And I don't think it actually ever died, but this was sort of a trend in music that was started sort of in the 70s in England and New York. And the features of punk music is sort of a stripped down, very raw, basic sort of sound. It doesn't have a lot of guitar solos. It doesn't have a lot of complicated harmonic structures. And it has what it has a lot of is power chords. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. That's an incredibly important guitar technique and a guitar thing that any guitar player, any beginning guitar student probably knows a little bit about power chords. And so what a power chord is it's just actually not, in technical terms, it's not a chord. It's just two notes. It's a dyad. And all it is it's just this interval. So it's a perfect fifth, and sometimes we'll play it with a perfect fifth with another note, another octave on top. So this chord, it sort of allows you, or this dyad, if you want to be technical about it, allows you to kind of create a cool sound without having to constrain yourself, because it'll sound cool in just about any way you play it. So if I'm playing the power chord progression, I'm just making this up the top of my head. Sounds pretty darn punk. And so punk musicians and punk artists such as the Ramones, Velvet Underground, the New York Dolls, and they're probably maybe a little bit of the exception because they did have piano and some other instrumentation in there. They played with sort of just a sort of these power chords and kind of this raw template for where they put sort of their tunes or their melodies and their lyrics over this. And I think that's the thing that people usually remember. And then also too, the harmony is something called harmonic rhythm. It was very slow. So they would usually stay on one sonority for a while. So like the Ramones, the I Wanna Be Sedated, the first part of that, if you look at that, it's just one chord for a while. Right, and then it moves to another chord, but it stays around this same sort of center for most of the tune, and that's really common with punk music. And another thing that they do too is they don't value, no one's going to care as much if they're not completely accurate. So some of the things people might call mistakes or people might call just sloppy, in their world, in that aesthetic, that's part of the experience. Live shows aren't supposed to sound, like the records they came on. And if you listen to any of the YouTube live performances of any of the punk groups, they sometimes sound fantastically different. And I think that's sort of just the nature of of the music. And then another thing that they did for the most part, especially the Ramones, they always played with a distorted guitar. So there's different ways to manipulate those sort of things. We've talked about feedback and distortion, but they always had a distorted instrument. So that just makes anything you play, have this distortion sound to it. So it's just that sustain that we get from the note. And it was sort of I call it like a thin distortion or a thin kind of tone. It wasn't a sort of a really deep, big, distortion. It was kind of just this very well, a punk sounding distortion is I think how I would say it. I think other people would say it. And also too, one last thing about punk stuff, I think usually they didn't mix it in a way that we might mix music, certainly from later eras. They didn't necessarily put the bass might be out in front, or which is something people would usually in the mixing room, they would kind of turn down the bass so it's not so loud. But the instruments seem to have more of, one might be louder, one might be quieter, and that's okay. That's part of the aesthetic. So I hope you enjoy listening to the rest of the tracks in this chapter, and I hope that helps your understanding of punk. And so here is a version of a punk tune that we made up just for you.